condition. So just read and follow the guidelines and you'll be fine. Now, there are also some guidelines, official guidelines, to designate the principal diagnosis on the top of page 23. 2 or more diagnoses that equally meet the definition for principal diagnosis. It doesn't always happen, but when it does, and it goes on to tell you, in the unusual situation in which 2 or more diagnoses equally meet the criteria, either may be sequenced first. This is the one and only time that it is legitimate to go for the greater amount of money. So you've got 2 diagnoses that both meet the test of principal diagnosis. One of them is A, one of them is B. They both equally admit it. A, however, will get you $5,000. B will get you $10,000. Which one will you choose? B, because it's going to get you more money, but only because they are equal and you cannot show in any way that one had a higher reason for admission than the other. Now you need to be careful, because would that be intensely scrutinized? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Now the 5th line there, however, it is not simply the fact that both conditions exist that makes this choice possible. When treatment is totally or primarily directed toward one condition, or when only one condition would have required inpatient care, that condition should be designated as a principal diagnosis. And it goes on to give you some examples. When you've got 2 or more comparable or contrasting conditions, this is number 2 at the bottom of page 23. Again, in the rare instance, because it's rare, when you've got 2 or more comparable or contrasting conditions and they're documented as either or, both diagnoses are coded as though confirmed, and the principal diagnosis is designated according to the circumstances of the admission. What in the world is talking about? We've got a patient in example number 1. They've got the same complaints as example 3 above, so let's look at that. The patient had severe abdominal pain. They had NNV, or nausea and vomiting. This was because they had acute pyelonephritis and diverticulitis. So both of those underlying conditions were treated in example 3, and the physician believed both equally met the criteria. In that case, either one could have been first. Now, if this was a DRG reimbursed patient, then you would code it to the one that was the highest payment. Again, that's the only only opportunity you'd ever have for doing that. All right, but if we look at example 1 at the bottom of the page, that refers us back to example 3 in the middle of the page. Got the same complaints, but he was admitted with a final diagnosis of acute pyelonephritis versus diverticulum of the colon. All right, what that means is when a doctor gives you a diagnosis of one thing versus another, he doesn't even know, he or she. It could be this or it could be this, but I can't tell you which one it is. I cannot specify. All right, so in that case, you're going to treat the patient symptomatically, and you're going to discharge them for further study. In that case, both of the diagnoses meet the criteria, and so again, if it's a DRG reimbursed patient or a patient that's reimbursed based on the severity of illness, which diagnosis are you going to use as a principal? The one that pays the most, but only in those unique circumstances. You're not going to, in this day and time, I hope, have too many patients that are going to be having a contrasting or a comparable diagnosis, because by the time the patient is discharged from the hospital, generally they are pretty much accurate on what's wrong with them, or they think they know what's wrong with them. There are sometimes, however, that they've got the condition down and both conditions are of such lower priority that they don't need to be treated in the hospital, that they might be able to be treated in the doctor's office, and so it's not a good thing for them to keep them in the hospital at that point. All right, a symptom followed by contrasting and comparative diagnoses. Your example, the patient came in because they had severe fatigue. Well, that's a symptom. We don't know why they've got the fatigue, but that's a symptom of a lot of things. The discharge diagnosis was recorded as fatigue, but it was either due to a depressive reaction or hypothyroidism. The doctor didn't even know which one it was due to. He knew they had fatigue, but he didn't know if it was for a depressive reaction or hypothyroidism. All right, in this case, the symptom code for fatigue is designated the principal diagnosis because that's the one thing we know for sure. And here, normally, when you have a symptom that is explained by way of a diagnosis, do you code the symptom? No. For example, if I'm having a heart attack, do you code chest pain? No, because the chest pain is inherent in the heart attack. But this is an exception to that rule. So when you've got a symptom followed by contrasting or comparative diagnoses, then in that case you code what you absolutely know they have, which is the fatigue, as a principle. Then you also code the depressive reaction and the hypothyroidism. All right, but if it had been fatigue due to depressive reaction, what would you have coded? The depressive reaction. If you had fatigue due to hypothyroidism, what would you code? The hypothyroidism. And you would have done nothing with the fatigue. The very fact that it had a contrasting diagnosis is what throws it. So anytime you see versus or VS period, then you know there's some special rules that are going to apply. All right. Yep. Oh, yeah. Okay. The original treatment plan not being carried out. When the original treatment plan cannot be carried out due to unforeseen circumstances, the criteria for designation of the principal diagnosis do not change. The condition that occasioned the admission is designated as a principal even though the planned treatment was not carried out. So you've got a patient in example number 1. They had BPH of the prostate. They came in for a TURP. But just before or shortly after admission, the patient went to the OR, fell, got a fracture of the left femur. The TURP was canceled. Hip pinning was carried out. The principal diagnosis remains the hypertrophy, even though you're going to end up having no surgery for that, and it gets even more complicated because now you're going to have a code for the hip pinning. So you're going to have a diagnosis of BPH with the procedure of a hip pinning, and they aren't correlated at all, are they? In actuality, as you learn DRGs more, you will learn that that throws you into an extremely well-paying DRG, one that absolutely would be scrutinized because it is going to get you so much more money. So be careful with that when your original plan can't be done. Now, other diagnoses. What other diagnoses do you code other than the principal diagnosis? And I think you can do B codes, but that's on something special. Yeah. But what about if the patient has other disease processes? Can you code for those? No. How many codes can you have for a patient? You can't have many. Well, it's unlimited. Oh, I get that. It's absolutely unlimited, but you can code as many codes as you need to code everything wrong with the patient. The only limit you'll have is when you transfer those codes over to the billing form, the UB92 or the HCFA 1500, and when you transfer those over, there are a limited number of slots for that. But now remember, we code for statistics. I always have coded for statistics. Now we code for reimbursement too. So statistically, you never have a limit, unless your system just literally cannot hold but so many. But now for reimbursement purposes, there's a limited number that you can put on the claim form. All right, now, I want to show you why it's important to code for everything that you might have. And if we've got patient A, I'm going to try to put this on a piece of note. You can't see the notebook paper though. Well, let's see if I can do it up here.